versions of the Android operating system itself, upgrading your device from one version to the next isn't an easy option. In fact, it's not an option for many handset owners. So, well, what does this mean in terms of, and this, this is, of course, bridging a little bit into our discussion of the market, but who cares? This is about economies of scale. If you think about that, well, we're saying that the two platforms are roughly the same size in sales at the moment. Apple gets all of those sales on one side, and the sales on the other side are distributed between 22 different manufacturers. There's a question of economies of scale there. And as I say, there's kind of pain and friction a little bit on the versions of the operating system, the fact of there being a very, very controlled environment on one side compared to being, a relatively much less controlled environment on the other side. Pluses and minuses, no doubt about it. Now, what this kind of, for software developers, though, this kind of multi-platform environment kind of creates challenges, it creates headaches, and not just for software developers, obviously, because if you're a publisher and you've got a software team in-house or you're outsourcing this stuff, this is, you want to reach the multiple handsets. This is, you're going to have to end up paying for that some way, because if it's a headache for software developers, then it causes extra cost, obviously. So what I want to do is touch on this issue of cross-platform. What I mean by that, so it's the idea that, from a software perspective, you can develop one application that then sits on multiple different handsets. And so I kind of, I just wanted to use a little graphic to try and show, some of the issues around this, and it's probably fairly straightforward. When you want to get in cross-platform development, none of the device manufacturers, Apple or Google, will sell you a set of tools that let you, no surprise here, that let you deploy your application on somebody else's device. Clearly, they want to bring you into their platform environment. So it takes down to third-party software companies to produce sets of tools that let developers do that. Okay, they produce cross-platform toolkits that let developers build one application that then can be deployed on multiple different devices. Obviously, there are some issues in that. Again, it's about scale. It's going to be very hard for some of those companies to actually provide the same quality of tools as a company like Apple would do, simply because they're serving a much smaller market, and they're naturally much smaller companies. But there are tools out there that let you do this. So I've got there's for instance they fall into two different sets basically. There's a set which lets you build on the, if you like, the web side of the application, all of the things that are to do with building web pages and developing HTML, so things like PhoneGap and Romobile and AirPlay work in that way. And then there are sets of tools which are much lower level that let you build the actual program code and then deploy it. Of course, Adobe's in that mix. Adobe actually have tools which, until very recently, Apple were preventing them from doing this. But the picture of that, in short, is that people that have spent time investing in Flash actually now have a way of getting that content onto Apple's platform, which is, is a good news, because, obviously within publishing, there is a lot of Flash content out there, particularly on the educational side. However, back to the diagram for a second, the issue is really that when you build these tools that let you deploy into multiple environments, they tend to smooth out the differences between those environments, which sometimes is a disadvantage, because you'll find that different phones have different features which can't be reached if you're trying to go for a kind of, it's a basic problem of lowest common denominator. So the kind of spot in the middle is supposed to represent the common set of features that could be addressed by all platforms. Obviously, it's not to scale, so don't worry about the scale so much. The issue is that you have to make compromises in that environment. It means that you won't be able to do certain things on certain handsets that are, might be sexy features of the handset itself, but because of the nature of cross-platform development, you have to forego those things. Well, we just mentioned Flash a moment ago, and I think that's the moment to bring the kind of the Flash versus HTML5 debate up a few notches in terms of the radar, because there's this, the new HTML standard, HTML5, has got a lot of things in it that you could only do before with Flash. what that means, of course, is that if you're thinking about building content to the future, if you're thinking about sort of forward-facing plan for what you're going to do with all of those quizzes on your, in your kind of textbook content, for example, then you might well be wanting to know whether continuing to develop those in Flash is a good idea or not. Given the fact that that Flash won't ever play natively on Apple devices, although you can cross-compile it using some of these tools, and they work to some degree, obviously, because they're, Adobe in particular have got a lot vested in making sure that that stuff works properly. Nonetheless, the advantage for looking at HTML5, is potentially that you get, you're looking at an open standard which is supported by all of the web browsers for quite some considerable time in the future, just as HTML has been supported for quite some considerable time already in terms of the overall length of the internet's even been around. We're talking a lot of longevity there with HTML. So if there's I'm not saying that there's a prescriptive answer there, but I'm saying look carefully at HTML5 for what it can do, where you may well have had to use Flash in the past, because you will increase your reach to all kinds of platforms that you couldn't reach otherwise with the Flash content. So in a way, HTML5 is the kind of ultimate cross-platform tool. Okay, we'll cycle through e-readers now. As if we're not sick of them already, there's kind of ones with color, there's ones with butterfly kind of fold-outs, there's any number of different e-readers. And, in a way, one of the lessons there is we can't focus on devices. I know I've spent a lot of time talking about platforms in terms of smartphones, but talking about specific different devices here, we shouldn't be focusing on that. We should be focusing on some of the underlying technologies, the standards that we need to address in order to reach content out into these devices. So so I thought, well, what we'll do is we'll have a look on the content side of things briefly, and again, no wanting to spend too much overlap here with other presentations, but so I'm not going to go into lots of technical detail here about content formats, but there's some important things to understand here. EPUB and PDF and MobiPocket are delivery formats. They're, that's what's ending up being delivered effectively onto your e-reader device. With different levels of maturity, different levels of standardization, in a way, we are all familiar with how easy it is to take PDF, which was once destined for print, repurpose that, deliver it online. Okay, that's a pretty simple equation. It's really a matter of making sure that the images are downsampled enough so that it doesn't become an enormously large file. And there are good tools and tool sets in place for doing that and automating that process. One of the issues actually is which always comes up with that is about metadata. It's about things, it's about cover pages, for example. If you want to put this content online, you need to have good cover images, you need to have the right metadata in place, and some of this can be packed into PDFs, but you start to realize that that's actually moving the PDF which you thought you were repurposing from print into an online PDF, and it's starting to have its own workflow around it. So there are again, this ripples back through the production process in terms of where the challenges are. EPUB, just about to undergo a new version of this standard. Early next year, we'll be expecting version 3 of EPUB. It's based on HTML. It's pretty easy to produce. The tools are readily available to turn HTML content into EPUB files. So it's based on standards that are known and understood. Similarly, MobiPocket, it's based on an earlier version of the standard which became EPUB. It's relatively easy to automatically convert content which is in EPUB format into MobiPocket format. We'll talk about why you might need to do that in a moment. But one of the things that comes out of all of this is that, in order to, get into some of the, the more exciting features that I was talking about when we were talking about new forms earlier, you're going to, thinking purely in terms of a print-based workflow, which is maybe around PDF, which we know we can't automatically convert into anything useful. We need to look back down the production process into how we get XML into the equation, because that's fundamental for purposing, repurposing into multiple different output formats, as I hope you're all aware. So that's interesting. Now. the next bit that this segues onto is, we got to think carefully about this. There's a dangerous new